Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jaya Udiraye Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Bhaktim Uttamam Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Namah Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunnavadi Paschatadeshatarane. So we will commence from Canto 1, Chapter 11, verse 28. Okay.
What's happening 28 onwards? Krishna's.
Oh, this is Krishna in Dwarka. Pravishtastu graham pitra pravisht kata swamatprabhi vavande shirsha sapta devaki pramukhamuda. After entering the house of his father, he was embraced by the mothers present, and the Lord offered his obeisances unto them by placing his head at their feet. The mothers were headed by Devaki, his real mother. So, just to set the context again, so this is Krishna's journey into Dwarka. And we see that Krishna has traveled into various parts of Dwarka to finally reach his the palace of his father Vasudeva, and now he is greeting his mothers over here. So Sutta uses the term Swamatrabihi, and it indicates mothers in plural. So they actually point to the wives of Vasudeva. So as we know that Vasudeva had 18 wives, and of these 18 wives, Rohini is the eldest, and Devaki is either the youngest or amongst the youngest. Yet we see Sutta calling Devaki as Pramukha, headed by Devaki, and the reason is because of her exalted position, and because she was the mother of Krishna, the personality of Godhead, she is given this position of being the Pramukh, or the prominent wife of Vasudeva. There is a brief description about the wives of Vasudeva that appear in the 9th canto, 24th chapter, and there it is described that King Devak had 4 sons and 7 daughters. So of the 7 daughters, Dhritadeva was the eldest. Doesn't say about Devaki, but she was definitely not the eldest. And Vasudeva, the son of Vasudeva, the son of Shursen, he married all these 7 sisters. And in the very next verse, some of the wives are named of Vasudeva: Devaki, Pauravi, Rohini, Bhadra, Madira, Rochna, Ila, and the others are all wives of Anagdundubi. Among them, Devaki was the chief. So same point is made over there also, that Devaki was the chief, and because of her exalted position. So in this verse, Sutta calls Devaki as Sapta Devaki Pramukha. And one explanation is that he is saying that of the 7 sisters that Vasudeva married, Sapta Devaki Pramukha, the Devaki was the principal wife. But we also see the point that all the mothers, including the stepmothers, they embrace Krishna with affection. He says Parishvartaha, and in reciprocation, Krishna also does not distinguish between his real mothers and stepmothers and treats them all in the same way. Bhavadana Shirasha, that he places his head in obeisances. So, Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he also talks about another kind of 7 mothers. So he says that according to the scriptures, there are also 7 mothers: the real mother, the wife of the spiritual master, the wife of a Brahman, the wife of the king, the cow, the nurse, and the earth. All of them are mothers. So Srila Prabhupada is making this point as a preaching point, that just like Krishna does not distinguish between his 7 mothers, we should also not distinguish. Often, because of bodily affection, we focus on our birth mothers and neglect the other mothers, like the Guru Mata or the Brahmani or the wife of the king, the cow, Mother Earth. But Prabhupada is making this point that just like Krishna, we should also treat them all in the same way. Next verse, 111:29. Ta putram mankam arpya sne snuta payodaraha arsa vivalit atmanaha Shishichur netrajer jalahe. The mothers, after embracing their son, sat him on their laps. Due to pure affection, milk sprang from their breasts. They were overwhelmed with delight, and the tears from their eyes wetted the Lord. So this verse is also studied in terms of the confluence of rasas, and we'll do that a little later in the discussion. But the one of the points that is made over here is that comes out from here is that for a mother, a child is always a child. So when Krishna returned to Dwarka after the completion of the war, he was about 100 years old. But we see that his mothers are treating him just like a child. That they sit him on his lap, and out of maternal affection, milk is coming from their breast. So the mothers are in the sthai bhav of the mothers is vatsalya. That is how they relate to Krishna in the steady state. Sthai bhav in vatsalya ras. The impetus over here, the vibhav over here, is seeing Krishna face to face, coming in the personal presence of Krishna, and specifically, this is Vishaya Alamban Vibhav. So it is Alamban because it relates to the subject, which is Krishna, and it is Vishaya because the subject is Krishna. So what was the result of this Vibhav? That the mothers are embracing Krishna and placing him on their lapse. So this is an example of anubhav, because they are voluntarily performing this action. In addition to that, what else is happening? We see that tears are flowing from their eyes and milk is flowing from their breasts. This is an example of sattvic bhav, because these are involuntary actions. And what else is happening in addition to them? That they are becoming overwhelmed with delight. So this is an example of Vyabhachari bhav, since it signifies an intensification of emotions. So in this verse, we see the complete cycle of the confluence of rasas, from sthai bhav to vibhav to anubhav to sattvic bhav to Vyabhachari bhav. And this is very similar to the analogy that we had used earlier on to explain the mother seeing the child and the subsequent reactions. So this is based on this verse. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that when Lord Krishna was at Vrindavan, even the cows would become moistened by affection towards him, and he would draw milk from the nipples of every affectionate living being. So what to speak of the stepmothers, who are already as good as his own mother. So now the cows are in Shantaras, they are not in Vatsalya. But even they display their sattvic bhav, because the sattvic bhav is predicated on the nature of the soul. And Srila Prabhupada also speaks metaphorically. He says that he could draw milk from the nipples of every affectionate being. So here Prabhupada is alluding to us, that Krishna can draw bhakti. Krishna can draw so the milk that he's talking about is Shuddha Bhakti, and that from every living being. So from each and every jiva, including us, Krishna can draw out Shuddha Bhakti. Okay, we'll do the next verse, 111:30. Atha vishat swabhavanam sarvakamam anuttamam prasada yatra patni nam sahasrani cha shodasha. Thereafter, the Lord entered his palaces, which were perfect to the fullest extent. His wife lived in them, and they numbered over 16,000. So it's also interesting to notice the progression of Krishna within Dwarka, and also the progression of the rasas with Krishna. So in the first verse, Krishna was at the outskirts of Dwarka, and there he signaled his presence by blowing the conch. So the residents that heard the conch did not see Krishna. So this is Krishna in the impersonal form. Now this is not to say that the devotees were impersonal, but this is just that particular interaction with Krishna is in the Shanta bhav, which is characteristic of the impersonal form of interaction. Then in verses 6 to 10, we see the Aishwarya bhav in the devotees who are glorifying Krishna, and their own rasa is Shanta rasa or Dasya rasa, because we see them, they're worshipping Krishna as their master and protector. Then in verses 21 and 22, Krishna enters the city, and we see that he's reciprocating with the greetings and the worship of the citizens of Dwarka. So here we see Krishna in Sakhya bhav. And it's not pure Sakhya bhav, it's mingled with others, but we see Sakhya bhav emerge over here. Then in verse 23, he enters the city of Dwarka accompanied by the elderly and invalid Brahmins and their wives. In verse 24, he walks the public roads of Dwarka while the ladies ascend the roof to have a look at him. In verse 27, he continued to walk down the road leading to the palace of his parents. And in verse 28, he enters the palace of his father Vasudev and is greeted by his mothers. So here we see Krishna's Vatsalya Bhav, or not Krishna's Vatsalya Bhav, the Vatsalya Bhav of the devotees towards Krishna. Now, beginning from this verse, so we are at verse 30. For the next 5 verses, we will see Krishna's interaction with his devotees in Shringar Ras or Madhurya Bhav with his wives. So the progression is not completely linear from Shanta to Dasya to Vatsalya, but we see that these verses, these bhavas, they kind of emerge as Krishna enters deeper and deeper into the city of Dwarka, from the gate, from the outskirts to the gate, to walking down the streets, to further walking down the streets, to entering the palace of his father, and finally Swabhavanam. He's entering his own palace. So Swabhavanam is palaces, own palaces. And Sutta uses the plural to indicate that at this point, Krishna has manifested himself into multiple forms, and in each of the form he enters his own palace, which he says are Shodash Sahasrani Cha. So Shodasa Sahasrani is 16,000. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the Cha is put after that to refer to the other 108. So often we will see, for the sake of convenience, it may be mentioned that Krishna has 16,000 wives, or he has 16,100 wives. So this doesn't mean that the numbers are changing. They're just notional convenience. They don't contradict the fact that Krishna has exactly 16,108 wives. So if you remember, in the 10th chapter, we had discussed when Krishna was exiting Hastinapur. So there the ladies, they had ascended the roofs, and then they had discussed about the good fortune, about the queens of Dwarka, how they taste the lotus lips of Krishna. Here we will see that interaction actually played out in these 5 verses. So everyone ran out to meet Krishna except for the parents because of their status. It would have been embarrassing to Krishna. It's not that they didn't want to, but it would have been embarrassing to Krishna for them to have run out on the streets to greet him. And the wives also did not go out of the palace because of their shyness. The relationship is intimate, so they do not demonstrate it in public. So they waited in the palace, waiting for Krishna to come. So in this context, once a devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, why did Krishna have so many wives? Why did he have 16,000 wives? And Prabhupada's response to this was that the question that you should ask is that why did Krishna have only 16,000 wives? So in the purport, he says that the Lord is unlimited, and therefore his desires are also unlimited, and the supply is also unlimited. Everything being unlimited, it is concisely described here as Sarva Tam, or full with all desirable equipment. And in the purport to the next verse, Prabhupada says, One should not therefore become astonished to learn that the Lord married so many wives. On the contrary, one should affirm that even if the Lord marries 16,000 million wives, he is not completely manifesting his unlimited and inexhaustible potency. He married only 16,000 wives and entered in each and every one of the different palaces just to impress in the history of the human beings on the surface of the earth that the Lord is never equal or less than any human being, however powerful he may be. No one is therefore either equal or greater than the Lord. The Lord is always great in all respect. God is great is the eternal truth. Okay, we'll go to the next verse, 111:31. पत्न्यः पतिं प्रोष्य ग्रहानुपम् आगतं विलोक्य संजता मनो महोत्सवः उतस्तु रारात् सहस आशन्नाशयात् साकं वृते वृदिता लोचनानः. The queens of Lord Shri Krishna rejoiced with their minds to see their husband home after a long period abroad. The queens got up at once from their seats and meditation. As was socially customary, they covered their faces shyly and looked about quietly. So this verse reflects the inner thoughts of the queens, and the acharyas have spent some time, I guess, churning more nectar out of this, the action of the queens. So the queens were wrestling with two things. At one end was their spontaneous love for Krishna, and at the other end was their their their, their intrinsic modesty and the need to maintain social etiquette. So as Krishna entered into the palaces, each of his wife saw him first from a distance, Vilokya Aryat, and rejoiced with the thought that Krishna has come to me first. Because of Krishna's Yogamaya, each of the wives thought that the Krishna who entered Dwarka is the Krishna who has entered my palace. They were not aware that Krishna is expanding himself and entering in all the palaces. So they're rejoicing that Krishna has come to me first. And because of that, their mind is described as Sanjata Mana Maha Utsava. So Sutta Goswami poetically describes that a great festival of joy was celebrated in the minds of the queens. Then with a desire to approach Krishna, they quickly, sahasa, got up, uthastu, from their seats, asan, and gave up their meditation, ashaya. So according to Sridhar Swami, the word asana ashayat, seats and meditation, implies that although the queens were sitting, in their anxiety to embrace Krishna, they immediately stood up. They could not bear the least delay, and they mentally and physically wanted to embrace Krishna. Yet, because the queen are chaste and shy women, they did not. So they curtailed this and they looked upon their husband with sidelong glances, thus expressing both eagerness and shyness. Vridita, Lochana, Anana. So the point that is made here is they gave up their seat, which means that they were sitting and they stood up. and they gave up their meditation. So what was this meditation that they gave up? And Prabhupada explains in the purport that the queens of Lord Krishna were all in meditation, thinking of the Lord's absence, and were always meditating upon him. The Lord's devotees cannot live for a moment without meditating on the Lord, and what to speak of the queens, who were all goddesses of fortune, incarnated as queens in the pastime of the Lord at Dwarka. They can never be separated from the Lord, either by presence or by trance. Such is the condition of the pure associates of the Lord. They are always in trance, and so the queens were also in trance during the absence of the Lord. So Prabhupada is pointing to the Vipralamba bhava of the queens. That while Krishna was away, they were associating with Krishna in meditation. And when Krishna came in their presence, they gave up this Vipralamba bhav because Krishna was directly present before them. So Prabhupada also makes an interesting point, which is, he just writes really few words, but he's summarizing the realizations of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He says that they can never be separated from the Lord, either by presence or by trance. So the point Prabhupada is making here is that at this point the queens realized that even their meditation was an impediment to their association with Krishna. So the same meditation that was helping them associate with Krishna at this point became an impediment. So they gave it up. So that is the mood of devotees, that they only evaluate something whether it is helping them associate with Krishna. In itself, nothing has any factual value. Its value is only determined in terms of how it relates to Krishna. When the queens were in the absence of Krishna, the same meditation helped them. Why? Because it helped them associate with Krishna in Vipralamba bhav. Now that Krishna was in their presence, the bhav changed to Sambhog, so they gave up the same meditation. So another point that is made in this verse is Sakam Vrata. That when they got up from the seats and the meditation, Prabhupada says that they got up along with their vows. So in conjunction with giving up, what this means is that along with their seats, along with their meditation, they also gave up their vows. Now, what is these vows that they were following that they gave up? And Prabhupada explains in the purport that in Vedic times, when the husband was not there with the wife, then it was customary for the wives to follow certain vows. And these vows were basically vows of austerity in order to protect their chastity and to increase the love for their husbands in separation. So these vows involve things like dressing in a simple way, avoiding social celebrations and festivals, meditating on the husband. So now that Krishna is back, the wives also gave up those vows because their husband is back before them. So seeing Krishna manifesting from aprakrit to prakrit, so Krishna was always with the wives, but in an aprakrit form, in their sambhog. But now they are prakrit. Krishna is prakrit, so that is why they gave up this. They gave up this vows. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he analyzes this verse in a slightly different way, and so there is, and it's just to churn some more nectar. So he says that that they gave up their seats and the meditation but not their vows. So when they got up from their seats, they gave up their meditation, but they retained their vows. And this is how he explains it, that the wives first gave up their seats and approached Krishna with a desire to embrace him. But considering the fact that they were still in a semi-public place, that they were in the palace where other people were there, they 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 stopped. So considering the body to be an obstacle in the service, they they gave up on their body to service Krishna and next went to the mind. So in their mind, they began to meditate on Krishna. So in this meditation, they cast coy sidelong glances on Krishna with a bent head. Vridita lochana ana. However, being chaste women, even though they were in the presence of their husband, even though they were they were experiencing intense love for him, they considered this to be inappropriate. So they gave up that meditation too. So the first thing that they gave up was their body, because they considered it inappropriate to embrace Krishna in public. The second thing that they gave up was the meditation, because it was intimate and something that they did not want to focus on in a public place. So they gave up their ashaya, they gave up their meditation. So they completely gave up their body and mind, and they embraced Krishna with their souls, which was unimpeded by any such consideration. Seeing Krishna, they, and this is I'm quoting Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport, seeing their beloved, suddenly they fainted out of bliss of prem. In fainting, as with deep sleep, they transcended the body and mind and embraced Krishna without any obstructions. So this explains the giving up of the seat and the meditation. Then he goes on to say the third thing they had with them was their vrata, their vows. A wife typically likes to appear before the husband well groomed and beautifully dressed. However, because of the vows that they were following while in separation of Krishna, they were emaciated and in an unkept state. So they, after having cast off their body and their meditations, they got up along with their vows. So he says Sakam Vrata means along with their vows. And why? So in this unkept and emaciated state, when Krishna saw them, he was reminded of their chastity. He was reminded of the vows that they followed in his absence, and thus he became even more affectionate towards him. So it's a long drawn purport, and Prabhupada summarizes Vishwanath Chakravarti's Thakur purport in the last paragraph of his own purport. So beginning from the word according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and then he gives a very concise summary of this whole purport. So Prabhupada writes both the he writes about both the interpretations of the verse for the benefit of the readers, so that we can enjoy more the intricate flow of emotions. Okay, so we'll go to the next verse, 111:32. Tamatmajair anantaratmana duranta bhava pari perapatim niruddham apyashravad ambunetrayor vilajatinam bhrigu varya vaiklavat. The insuperable ecstasy was so strong that the queens who were shy first embraced the Lord in the innermost recess of their hearts. They embraced him visually and then they send their sons to embrace him, which is equal to personal embracing. But, O chief amongst the Bhrigus, though they try to restrain their feelings, they inadvertently shed tears. So the previous verse talked about all the impediments of the queens desiring to embrace their patim, Krishna. So they were in an open place. There was the natural modesty, vilajatanam, which prevented them from doing what they wanted, which was embracing Krishna. So in this verse, the Goswami says that despite these consideration, their feelings of love for Krishna were so strong. He says, Duranta Bhava, that they still embraced him with their eyes, Drishtabhi. So as they said, love always finds a way. So despite all the considerations, the chastity, the modesty, the time, place, circumstance, the desire to embrace Krishna was so strong that they still embraced him, Drishtabhi, with their eyes. And Prabhupada says that the embrace of the eyes is most effective in conjugal relations and acceptable between a husband and a wife, even when they are in a public place. So in addition to this, they also embrace Krishna with their antaratmana, with their subtle bodies. So this was the point that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was making in the previous verse, that they cast their gross body, they cast their meditation, their mind, and their soul, unimpeded by any consideration, embraced Krishna. So this point is explicitly made in this point, that by their antaratmana, they embraced Krishna, and they also embraced Krishna by atmajahi, indirectly by their sons. So Prabhupada says that despite this, the act remained unfinished, and tears rolled down their cheek despite all endeavors to check them. So these are tears of frustration, that their feelings were so strong that even though they embraced Krishna by their antaratmana, even though they embraced Krishna by the drishtabhi, even though they embraced Krishna with atmajahi, because they could not embrace Krishna, tears of frustration rolled down their cheeks. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the tears were also that of embarrassment, because they realize that Krishna is aware of what they are doing, that they are embracing Krishna from the innermost recess of their eyes and of their heart, by the antaratmana, and then they are embracing Krishna with their eyes and through their sons, because they realize that Krishna is aware of what they are doing. They are embarrassed. So the tears that came down the eyes were a mixture of tears of frustration, tears of embarrassment, and ultimately tears of ecstasy. So in the Rasa Leela pastime, a similar feeling exchange is described in the relationship to gopis. One gopi took the Lord through the aperture of her eyes and placed him within her heart. Then, with her eyes closed and her bodily hair standing on end, she continuously embraced him within. Thus, immersed in transcendental ecstasy, she resembled a yogi meditating upon the Lord. So one of the embraces that the queens extended towards Krishna was that through their sons, which is considered to be an extension of the mother's body. So in a way, this is a bit of a rasabhas, because the rasa of a child embracing the father is vatsalya, and it is different from the rasa of a wife embracing her husband, which is shringar or madhurya. So this would represent rasabhas, because it is not proper to enjoy conjugal love through the sons. But Jiva Goswami, he clarifies in this context, says that the queens, they were nourishing their samanya priti or general affection through their sons and not their kanta bhav. So kanta is another name for madhurya or shringaras, which they were nourishing through their eyes and through their subtle body. So through the embracing of the sons, they were nourishing their samanya priti or general affection. So he concludes that there is nothing wrong and there is no rasabhas to be seen in this exchange. Okay, we'll do one more verse and then we'll stop for questions. 1133, 1133. Yadyapai asau parshva gato gatas tatha pitasyangari yugam navam pade pade kavirmeta tatpada chala piyashrir najahati karchit. Although Lord Krishna was constantly by the sides as well as exclusively alone, his feet appeared to them to be newer and newer. The goddess of fortune, although by nature always restless and moving, could not quit the Lord's feet. So what woman can be detached from those feet, having once taken shelter of them? So this verse answers the question of why were the queens so intensely attached to Krishna. So Sutta actually, he starts off this verse by giving a reason of why they should not be attached to Krishna or so intensely attached to Krishna. So he says that the queens certainly, Api, had Krishna by their side, Parshvagata, and also Rahagata. So Parshvagata means that he was closely by their sides, and Rahagata means that he was exclusively by their sides. So the two things that nourish infatuation is new love and love in competition. So when we see that when a man and a woman fall newly in love, then the attraction is very intense. The other situation when it becomes intense is when there is separation. Now, both these things are, Sutta Goswami is saying, is absent over here. He was saying Krishna was Parshvagata, that he was constantly by their side, and Rahagata, that he was exclusively by their side. So they did not have, so even though Krishna went abroad, but Sutta Goswami at this point is taking the composite mode of the queens. Whether in Sambhog or Vipralamba, the Krishna was by their sides. And he was exclusively by their side. Now he explains that why despite these two, the queens had such an intense attraction to Krishna. And he says that because the novelty of Krishna's lotus feet, Angri Yugam, appeared Navam Navam. It appeared newer and newer. So it is always new love. So Jiva Goswami in Preeti Sandarbha 34, he analyzed this from the perspective of rasa. So he says that Rahagata, exclusive alone, is applied to Krishna only and not to Krishna and the wives. So in that context, what it means is that Krishna was always alone, even when he was with his wives. So previously, what we had said that Krishna was alone with his wives, which pointed to Krishna's exclusive attention to his wives. So Jiva Goswami said we can also understand this, that Krishna was alone even when he was with his wives, but now he was Parshvagata. That now he was actually by their sides. So that was the Vibhav. And the reason why the feet appear new at every moment is so I'm quoting Jiva Goswami's purport. He says that the reason why his feet appear new at every moment is not astonishing, because of the subsequent anurag in the queens of seeking continued association of his lotus feet. So Jiva Goswami explains this in a way that because Krishna, even when he was with his wives, was alone, at this particular interaction, he was extending himself to be uh, uh, Parshvagata, to be actually um, associating with his wives. So in reaction to this vibhav, we see this strong anurag, or this strong affection, appearing in the queens. So this points to, and this is a quality of Krishna that Sutta Goswami will speak about in the later verses. So right now he's alluding to it indirectly, but he will speak about it more directly in the later verses. And this is Krishna's quality of detachment. That even though Krishna is married to 16,108 wives, he is still detached. Just like Durvasha Rishi says to the gopis, after they had spent one full night of rasa dance with Krishna, Durvasha Rishi informs the gopis that Krishna is a Naishtik brahmachari. And the gopis initially laugh when they hear it, but then the understanding is that Krishna, because he was associating in the mood of detachment, he is never touched. So even if one was to interpret this verse that Krishna and the queens are typically alone, this mood of Nava Nava is explained in Brahma Samhita. And this is verse 533, where Krishna is described as Navayovanam, or one who is always, so Navayovanam means is always blooming in newfound youth. So this newness does not only affect the queens. Sutta Goswami says that even Lakshmi Devi, Shri, who by nature is fickle and does not stay at one place for a long time, so he says, Chalapi na jahati karichit. Even she never quits the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. So Lakshmi Devi is addressed as Shri, which means that she is the foremost of women. So when she cannot stay away, the foremost of women cannot stay away from the lotus feet of Krishna, which woman can? And this question is rhetorical because it is placed to make a point that neither Lakshmi Devi nor the queens of Dwarka nor anyone else who once has experienced the shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna is ever willing to give it up, because they appear newer and newer at every moment. So this verse also applies to us, that once we have experienced the lotus feet of Krishna, then we will not be willing to give it up because it appears newer and newer. So these are the realizations of devotees. That every time you chant, you get new realizations, even though you are chanting every day for so many years. Every time you read Bhagavad Gita, you get new realizations. Every time you see the deities, you experience new things in the presence of the deity. Every time you associate with the devotees and do Krishna Katha, new realizations come. All these are the reflections of the Navam Navam, the newness of Krishna's lotus feet. Jiva Goswami by nature, he is analytical. So he says that this particular logic is called Kaimutya Nyaya. Kimuta means even more so. And in Western philosophy, this particular Nyaya is known as a fortiori. So fortiori is Latin for from the stronger. So this particular logic, in this particular of method of Nyaya, a weaker point is made by connecting it with a stronger point. So the connection of Lakshmi Devi with the lotus feet of Krishna is the stronger proposition, because she is free, she is the foremost, and the fact is demonstrated several times over, that how Lakshmi Devi is constantly sitting by the lotus feet of Garbhodaksha Vishnu, never giving it up. So that's the stronger proposition. And so the Goswami here is comparing the relatively weaker proposition, which is the attraction of the queens of Dwarka to Krishna, and connecting it to that of Lakshmi Devi, to make that to complete that logic. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada also uses this point to make a strong preaching point. And he says that in the material world, everyone is hankering after Lakshmi Devi. Now, the Lakshmi Devi that is referred to in this verse is Vaikuntha Lakshmi. Prabhupada in the purport, he's talking about the Lakshmi Devi that appears in the material world. That is why he's saying that in the material world, everyone is hankering after Lakshmi Devi. But she is fickle. She comes and goes. However, she is always at the lotus feet of her husband, Lord Vishnu. Thus one can attain the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. Thus one who attains the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu automatically attains a steady association of Lakshmi Devi. So the preaching point that Prabhupada makes over here is that people are trying to run after wealth. And because wealth, which is a representation of Lakshmi Devi, is fickle by nature, will come and go. But when one gets the lotus feet of Krishna in their heart, then Lakshmi Devi as a chaste wife will never leave the heart. So devotees have all kinds of opulences, even though they don't strive for it separately. Even they don't aspire for it, but they automatically get it because of this chastity of Lakshmi Devi towards her husband. Okay, so I'll stop over here and see if there are any questions or comments.
You just mentioned that Lakshmi Devi being a stronger devotee, then what to compare with? In the end, you're comparing actually with ordinary women or with queens of Dwarka with Lakshmi Devi. That point I did not get it.
So both. So the comparison in the verse is between the queens of Dwarka and Lakshmi Devi. And then Prabhupada in the purport, he extends it to us also. That he actually writes that Krishna is the Adipurusha and Jiva is Prakriti. So just like Lakshmi Devi cannot give up the lotus feet of Krishna, just like the queens of Dwarka cannot give up the lotus feet of Krishna, so even we are part of his feminine energy, and in our constitutional position, it is difficult for us to give up his lotus feet.
Okay, and you mentioned that Kimuta Nyaya, that stronger proposition is compared with the weaker one, but that logic itself I could not get it, because if you can.
So I guess I can repeat what I said. The Kaimutya Nyaya is basically the technique of making a weaker point by relating it to a stronger point. So for example, if I were to say that if you drive 10 miles above the speed limit, you will get a $50 ticket. And then after that, I say that if you drive 20 miles above the speed limit, you will get at least a $50 ticket. So the second point, it is related to the first point. Now the first point could be it could appear as a rule that anybody driving 10 miles above the speed limit will get a $50 ticket. So it is published, it is known. Now somebody might come and say, but I was driving 12 miles above the speed limit. So then we can say that if you drive 10 miles, you'll get 50. For 12 miles, you'll get at least 50. So even though that particular notation is not made, that what happens to you if you're driving 12 miles above the speed limit. So if you look up either of the two, if you look up Kamutyanai or if you look up A for theory, both of them explain so they're almost synonymous. Even though A for theory is a Greek philosophical, it comes from Greek philosophy, but they also establish this in exactly the same way. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, yes, Rangadas. Prabhu, about when we talk about Lakshmi Devi here, can we take it also Radharani interchangeably, because Radharani also never leave Krishna in a way also?
Oh yes, I think you're right, Prabhu. I think the general point that is being made over here is the intense attraction of Krishna's devotees towards his lotus feet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, so if there are no other questions, we can proceed with the next verse. 111:34. Evam nrpranam kshitibar janmanam akshon bi parivrata tejasam vidaya vairam swasano yathanalam mitho vadhenu parat nirayudaha. The Lord was pacified after killing those kings who were burdensome to the earth. They were puffed up with their military strength, their horses, elephants, chariots, infantry, etc. He himself was not a party in the fight. He simply created hostility between the powerful administrators, and they fought amongst themselves. He was like the wind, which causes friction between bamboos and so sparks a fire. So this verse, it does not follow the trend established by the previous verses. So we see Sutta Goswami talking about Krishna entering Dwarka all the way to Krishna entering his palaces and the intense emotion being experienced by his wives. The previous verse talked about how they were not able to control their emotions and tears were flowing down their eyes. Now all of a sudden in this verse, Sutta Goswami is talking about the battle of Mahabharata. He's saying that how Krishna engineered this battle of Mahabharata and how so many kings were killed and he created hostilities. So the reason that this verse comes is best understood in understanding the overall flow of what's been happening so far. So we'll see that from here till the end of the chapter. So there are 6 verses that remain, and hopefully we'll finish the chapter today. Sutta Goswami will speak about the position of Krishna in the material world. So why is he doing that? So this is a break in the mood, because at this point Sutta Goswami is preparing us to say goodbye to Krishna. So if you remember that Sutta Goswami, he started speaking about Krishna in the 7th chapter. The sons of Drona punished, and we see Krishna first appear in Bhagavatam driving the chariot of Arjun while he's chasing Ashwathama. So at that time we had discussed that Sutta Goswami had started speaking about Krishna to establish the context for the answer to the sages about Maharaj Parikshit. So one of the questions that the sages had asked Sutta Goswami was, tell us about the birth and the circumstances that relate to the appearance of the birth of Parikshit Maharaj. So in order to establish that, Sutta Goswami begins to speak from the from Arjun chasing Ashwathama. Since then, Sutta Goswami has spoken 5 chapters from 7 to 11 about Krishna. So in the 7th chapter, he speaks about Krishna protecting Arjun from the Brahmastra of Ashwathama, which leads us to the 8th chapter, where Sutta Goswami speaks about Krishna protecting Parikshit Maharaj in the womb of Uttara. Now at this point, Sutta Goswami has answered the question of the sages about the birth of Parikshit Maharaj. But he does not stop at this point. He goes beyond it and he speaks about the prayers of Queen Kunti. Then, after speaking about the prayers of Queen Kunti, he speaks about the interaction of Bhishma Dev and the meditation of Bhishma Dev upon Krishna. He then speaks about the mood of devotion in imminent separation when he speaks about the ladies of Hastinapur. And now he was speaking about the mood of the devotees in association with Krishna when he is talking about the various residents of Dwarka. So the Acharyas say that, and Prabhupada makes this comment in the first verse of the next chapter, that this is the nature of Krishna Katha. That once it starts, it's like nectar. It is difficult to stop it. So Sutta Goswami, he had already answered the question of the sages. But because he is so much enjoying, and not only he, but the sages also, they're so much enjoying all this talk about Krishna that he goes on and on and on. He talks about Queen Kunti, he talks about Bhishma Dev, he talks about the residents of Hastinapur, talks about the residents of Dwarka. But Sutta Goswami is also a preacher. And at this point, he realizes that he can go on forever and ever. So he makes a conscious effort to stop. So this is the beginning of the end of Krishna Katha as it relates directly to Krishna Swayam Bhagwan. And in ending, Sutta Goswami wants to make sure that he has ended without giving any false messages to the sages and ultimately to us. So in order to do this, he will once again establish the position of Krishna. So he has talked about these intimate dealings, especially the ones with the queens. He has talked about these intimate dealings. And he does not want to end Krishna Katha part 1 with us. So there are 2 misconceptions that come in the minds of people when they hear Krishna Katha without being properly anchored in the philosophy. One is that because Krishna has appeared in the material world, they consider Krishna to be material. 2, when they consider Krishna performing these pastimes or these activities, like relating to his wife and his friends and enemies, they consider Krishna to be subject to the modes of material nature. So Sutta Goswami wants to make sure that both these misconceptions are addressed. That even when Krishna comes down to the material world, he is not material, and even though his activities might appear to be mundane, he is never conditioned. So in the next 6 verses, he will make this point. So in the purport, Prabhupada says, this state of affair is called dharmasya glani. So now we're going back to the verse. We've kind of discussed a little bit of why this verse has appeared. Now we'll discuss the verse per se. So 2 points are made in this verse. One, that Krishna's activities may appear mundane, but they have no material tinge. And the second, that the interactions of Krishna with his devotees are different from the non-devotees. And this is, as I mentioned, to clarify those 2 misconceptions. So for the first point, Prabhupada expands in the purport that the state of affairs is called dharmasya glani, or misuse of the energy of the human being. When such misuse of human energy is prominent, the saner living beings become perturbed by the awkward situation created by the Vikshas administrators, who are simply burdens of the earth, and the Lord appears by his internal potency just to save the saner section of the humanity. So Prabhupada is talking about the reason for this descent, which we have discussed several times. But the main point that Prabhupada makes is that he appears by his internal potency. So even though he comes in the material world, he comes by his spiritual potency. The second point that Sutta Goswami makes in the verse is the interaction of Krishna in the battle of Mahabharata. And it may appear mundane because Krishna is appearing as a politician, he's playing favorites, he's taking parts in all kinds of intrigue. But Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Sutta Goswami does this for contrast. So how do we understand this? So let's take the previous verse into consideration. So in the previous verses, we see that the interaction of Krishna with his queens is full of unimpeded love. This is completely different from his other interactions, as with the killings of the impious kings in the battle of Mahabharata. And the way it is different is that the first interaction was the interaction of Krishna with his devotees. And that happens because of Krishna's desire, because he is Anandamai. He desires happiness, and out of that desire, he interacts with his devotees. However, the interaction of Krishna in Mahabharata is primarily dealing with the non-devotees. So, Sutta uses the term uparata, that because of this interaction, Krishna is, uparata means that he is relieved or pacified. So, he does not use the word that they were pleasing to Krishna. So, pacified points to a situation where Krishna is aware that he has to do this as his duty, and when his duty is successfully executed, he is pacified. So the 2 interactions are explained. One is by Krishna's will, and the other is by Krishna's desire. So by his will, he is interacting with the non-devotees. By his desires, he is interacting with his devotees. But in both these interactions, Krishna is never conditioned. So the first interaction, as with the Mahabharata, is because he is executing his duty. Not because he was partial to Arjuna, or because he was envious of Dhritarashtra, he was angry at Duryodhana, not because of that, but because he was executing his duty. The second kind of interaction that we see in Dwarka are interactions of Krishna with his devotees, which is again coming because of his spiritual joy. There is nothing material about it. So when people will talk about any kind, and between these two interactions, and that's why Sutta Goswami, he brings the dial to the other extreme. From the very intimate association of Krishna with his wives, he brings the dial to Krishna's interaction in the battle of Mahabharata. But the point he makes is both these interactions are not to be considered mundane, because Krishna is not conditioned in either one of them. One of them he does out of his duty, and the other he does out of his desire. Okay, so we'll do the next verse. सा एषा नरलोकस्मिन् अवित्रना स्वमायया रेमस्थिरत्नकुतस्था भगवान् प्राकृतो यतः. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, out of his causeless mercy, appeared on this planet by his internal potency and enjoyed himself amongst competent women as if he were engaging in mundane affairs. So this verse is an expansion on the previous verse. So the point that was made in a more subtle way in the previous verse is made more explicitly in this verse. So Sutta is sensitive to the audience. And so his immediate audiences are the sages of Naimisharan. So he wants to make sure that not only does he speak the truth, but the truth is also understood. Because if you say something and there is a possibility of it being misunderstood, then the speaker has not done justice to the fact that he was speaking. So that is why in 3 verses from 35 to 37, Sutta Goswami is going to explain to the sages that these conjugal relationships that he has discussed are not mundane. So it is easier for us to understand Krishna's detachment in Mahabharata, because Glanir Bhavatid Bharata, that he has come there because there was a decline in dharma, and to re-establish the principles of religion. Relatively easy for us to understand. More difficult for us to understand that Krishna came and he was having these. So we are not even speaking about the gopis at this point, but we are still speaking about the madhurya pastime that he has with the queens. So what Sutta Goswami is trying to protect us from is what is known as Atmavan Manyate Jagat. So Atmavan Manyate Jagat means that we think of the world in the way that we perceive it. So the way that we are, we think the world to be like that. Because we are conditioned, we consider Krishna to be conditioned. Because our interaction with the opposite sex is based on lust, we consider Krishna's interaction with his wives and gopis to be based on lust. So Sutta Goswami wants to protect the sages and us from this conception. So in the context of the previous verse, this verse can be understood that just as Krishna is completely transcendental to the great war of Mahabharata, his seemingly mundane interaction with his queens is also spiritual. So Krishna descends to the material world out of his mercy for us, but he never becomes material. His intimate interactions in the material world are spiritual because he is only interacting with his spiritual devotees. So the 2 points are again being emphasized, that Krishna is coming down to the material world. So mercy is also duty. So he's coming down to the material world because of his mercy or because of his duty. So all the things that he's doing, the battle of Mahabharata, the killing of Jarasandh and the armies of Jarasandh, etc., he's doing that out of his duty. So there is nothing material about it. His interactions with his wives are spiritual because they are his eternal associates. So even that cannot be considered to be mundane. Prabhupada in the purport also makes an interesting point that we should not consider that Krishna is imitating human behavior. But what we should understand is that humans are imitating Krishna's behavior. That Krishna is the source of all the emotions. Krishna has his nature. He marries, he has wives, he has families, he has friends, he takes care of his friends. We also act in that way. So it's not Atmavan Manyate Jagat, right? Because it's not that we are looking at Krishna from the material perspective, but we are the way we are because we are the reflection of Krishna's spiritual perspective. Okay, next verse, 111:36. Udama bhav pishun amalaval guhasa vridavalok nihata madano apiyasham samuya chapa majahat pramadottamastata yasendriyayam vimahitum kukaher nashekuhu. Although the queen's beautiful smiles and furtive glances were all spotless and exciting, and although they could conquer Cupid himself by making him give up his bow in frustration, and although even the tolerant Shiva could fall victim to them, still, despite all the magical feats and attractions, they could not agitate the senses of the Lord. So, this verse is again talking about Krishna's simultaneous attachment and detachment when we see him conducting his pastimes in the material world. So, in response to the previous verse, one could ask the question that how can Krishna be considered to be beyond matter when we see him enjoying with his senses the sense object? So this is specifically Krishna's interactions with his wives. So previous verse demonstrated that Krishna appeared in the material world and he's performing seemingly material pastimes like political intrigue, battle of Kurukshetra, marrying many beautiful women. But factually, there is nothing material about all this. So two types of detachments have been discussed and are further discussed in this verse. First is the detachment because he came only out of a sense of duty and his causeless mercy. That is the first. When you're doing something because it's a duty, then you're automatically detached. That's the first kind of detachment. The second detachment is because and I'll expand on that. The second detachment is because there is no attachment. And this verse demonstrates the second point, that even though Krishna was seemingly fully attached, but he was detached because there was no attachment. So Sutta Goswami, in order to glorify the detachment of Krishna, he first of all glorifies the object of attachment. Because it is easy to be detached from something that is not attractive. That if you're given food that is unpalatable, then you can say, I'm not hungry. But if you're given palatable food, difficult to say that I'm not hungry. Or if you're being put in a situation that is contrary, then you can say, I'm not attached to this situation. But Sutta Goswami here is saying that the object of attachment here is none other than the than the queens of Dwarka. So he says, so how is he glorifying them? He's saying that they had beautiful smiles, Valguhas. They had bashful glances, Vrida Avalok, and they had deep love, deep prema, Udama Bhav. And all of this was exclusively directed towards Krishna. So what was the potency of these glances and smiles? Sutta Goswami says that they can conquer and frustrate Cupid. So Cupid has, so he says that they frustrate Cupid to the extent that he gives up his bow and arrow. So the arrows of Cupid are known as Pushpavan. And Prabhupada says that Cupid throws his arrows upon the living beings to make them mad after the opposite sex, whether the party is actually beautiful or not. So in this case, what to speak when the queens are actually exquisitively beautiful? So how was Cupid getting frustrated over here? And the acharyas give different reasons. So firstly, they say is that when he sees the queens, he readies his bow and arrow to shoot at them. But then he sees the intense love and affection of the queens towards Krishna. And he realizes that none of his arrows can ever compete with the love and affection that the queens intrinsically have towards Krishna. So he gives it up in frustration. Jiva Goswami in Preeti Sandarbha 136, he says that the Pushpavan, the arrow of Cupid, is meant to incite lust. But when he sees the love of the queen, he realized that there is completely no opportunity for him to incite lust. So he gives up his bow and arrows in frustration. The third reason is given by Jaidev Goswami, where he says, Bhrupallavam dhanor apanga tarangitani bana, that the eyebrows were the bows and the waves of the glances their arrows. So here he is talking about the natural bows and arrows that the queens of Dwarka possessed. That their eyebrows were their bows and the glances were their arrow. And they were much more effective than what Cupid had. So he gives up his weapons in frustrations. So the second point that is made is that the queens actually bewildered Cupid. How is that? Because of their exquisite beauty. So when Cupid, Kamdev, he looked upon the queens of Dwarka, he himself became bewildered by the beauty, by the sidelong glasses, by the exciting spotless smile. He himself became bewildered. So, but one might say that Cupid is a demigod. It's easy for him to get bewildered. So, Srila Prabhupada, so Amadana. So, Madan is another name of Cupid. Madan is bewildered Cupid. It also means Lord Shiva. So, Lord Shiva is known as Amadan because he burned Cupid with his glance. So, Lord Shiva is famous for his tolerance, and is very famous for his control of senses. So Srila Prabhupada translates the verse as that not only Cupid, but even Lord Shiva would have been bewildered by the beauty of the queens and their glances. But they could not agitate Krishna. So he's using both Kamadev and Lord Shiv as a reference point. And he's embellishing it further by saying that not only were the queens extremely beautiful, but they were deeply in love with Krishna. So beauty in itself can attract somebody, but beauty coming from a person who's deeply in love. And not only were they deeply in love, they are yasendriyam vimahitam kukair naseku. They were actively trying to attract Krishna's attention. by their sidelong glances. Prabhupada said, by the magical feats. So we have over here women who are extremely beautiful, completely in love, and fully engrossed in trying to attract the attention of Krishna. But they could not. So the point that is made is that the point that is made is the detachment of Krishna. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he makes a finer point that saying that the queens were unable to attract Krishna's attention would not be fair to the devotion, because it is the nature of Krishna to respond to the devotion of the devotee. So that is why Sutta Goswami, he uses the word kuhaka, which means deception. And so what he says is that there were some queens who were deceptively trying to attract Krishna's attention. To them he was detached. And to the other queens who were in spontaneous love with Krishna, to them he was responding completely. So Krishna, and this points to Krishna's dual response in the material world, that to his devotees he was responding, but to the non-devotees he was detached. And of course, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur later on makes the point that this is not to say that there were any queens in any of the women who were queens of Krishna were deceptive by nature, because all of them were pure devotees. But this point is used as a what-if scenario to say that even if they were, Krishna would have been detached. Prabhupada makes an important preaching point over here. He says that it is commonly accepted that when one is making spiritual advancement, one must give up sex and sex desires. Yet at the same time, this conjugal relationship with Krishna is being glorified. How can we understand? This? And he explains in the purport that and he writes it in italics, that they satisfied him by their sincere affection and service. So the point Prabhupada makes is that the queens were pure devotees of Krishna. So that was their primary qualification. Now the way that they expressed their pure devotion for Krishna was in conjugal form. And because Krishna, he makes this promise that he will respond to the devotees in the similar mood, he also responds in the same rasa. So Krishna indulging in Madhurya Ras is not to be confused with the material engagement in these kinds of interaction, because it is actually Krishna's response to the desire of his pure devotees. Another point that is made is that Krishna is Rasoraj, which means all the rasas, they reside in Krishna, including Shangaras. So the reason that the devotees, they approach Krishna in Madhurya Ras is because they are aware of that Ras existing in Krishna, because the same Ras is reflected in them. So this is one of those cases of cyclical feedback. The reason the devotees approach Krishna in Shangar Ras is because that Ras is already there in Krishna, and the reason Krishna responds to them is in the same Ras is because the Ras is appearing in the devotees. So just like when an object comes within two mirrors and it gets reflected an infinite number of times, so between Krishna and his devotees, this mood of serving, enjoying and serving gets reflected multiple times. Okay, so I'll stop at this point. I was hoping to complete the chapter, but I don't want to rush. I realize I'm out of time, but if there are any questions or comments, we can take them.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. This is Nandagopal Das. Please accept my humble obeisances. Prabhu, just one thing I noticed is our understanding is when we say Krishna's, our attachment or our detachment is complete only when we have attachment to Krishna, the Supreme Lord. Whereas Krishna's detachment is complete even without any attachment. Is it right understanding?
So that was the so yes, Prabhu. So that was the first part of the understanding, that Krishna's detachment to the material world is complete because he comes as a matter of duty. So there is no attachment per se. Now the second part of Krishna's detachment is, how do we understand Krishna's attachment with his wives? And that is explained from the perspective of there is material detachment but spiritual attachment. Because if you think of it, that if Krishna is presented as fully detached, then that is impersonal Krishna, that he has no attachment for anybody or anything. So Sutta Goswami is trying to make one point and also protect us from a different misconception. So he's making the point that Krishna is coming to the material world from the perspective of his duty and mercy. They use it interchangeably, and that is his complete detachment. The second point that he's making is that that all these interactions of Krishna's so-called attachment, Krishna with his wives, Krishna with his intimate friends, are actually only Krishna associating with his devotees, which means that they are spiritual attachment but not material attachment.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
And Prabhuji, one question: how come mercy can be duty? Because there is no duty duty means you are supposed to do, but Krishna there is nothing like he is supposed to do.
So that's the answer to your question, Prabhu, right? So Krishna executes his duty out of mercy. He is not supposed to do it, but he does this because he is merciful to the conditioned souls.
Oh, so you mean to say his duty is his mercy? Is it to the correct understanding, Prabhuji?
Yes, Prabhu. Okay, so if there are no more questions, we'll stop here. Vancha kalpatarubhayascha kripa sindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Gaur Premanand. Hari